Alexander Vorontsov from the Institute of Oriental Studies believes China and U.S. prospective involvements with North and South Korea could lead to a global conflict.
It will be a nightmare for many countries. And first of all, for the 6 countries who met in six-party talks. We have the common border with Korean Peninsula, and China also. And of course, China can be involved because they have the treaty. Alliance treaty with North Korea first, and they demonstrated recently their readiness to prevent collapse of North Korea. And it will be 2 superpowers involved, United States and China. It's possible that the Third World War can start in Korean Peninsula, unfortunately.
A spokesman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the DPRK gave a statement to media on Monday concerning the extremely provocative and aggressive large-scale joint military exercises kicked off by the United States. The statement said the Ulster Freedom Guardian joint military exercises, a military manifestation of the U.S. hostile policy toward the DPRK, are aggressive war exercises aimed at the DPRK, and continued. Armed forces huge enough for a war are thrown into the war exercises according to the scenario of a war to surprise and occupy the DPRK. In recent years, the United States is increasing the frequency and intensity of the large-scale joint military exercises in the Korean Peninsula for the purpose of controlling the DPRK and its surrounding countries by force of arms, according to its new defense strategy. The essence of the new defense strategy pursued by the United States is to shift its strategic focus to the Asia-Pacific region and dominate Asia with extensive arms build-up and military blackmail. The first target of the United States in the strategy is to suffocate the DPRK with strength and use the whole of the Korean Peninsula as a foothold for implementing the strategy of Asian domination. The present reality demands us further strengthen the war deterrent fiscally and shows that our resolve to re-examine the nuclear issue totally is quite correct. Our war deterrent is just means of retaliation and mighty treasured sword and a powerful means to deter war in the Korean Peninsula. The United States must clearly see the reality and immediately roll back its anachronistic hostile policy toward the DPRK. If the United States persists in its unchanged hostile policy, it will get nothing but a miserable end. It is the firm will of our army and people to deal a fatal counterattack at the aggressors, making a clumsy fire, and develop it into war for national reunification. On December 12th last year, we successfully launched peaceful man-made Earth satellite openly and squarely, in a comparatively tranquil situation, ensuring international transparency beyond usage. But the United States and its followers, who had intended to make our satellite launch an opportunity to suffocate the DPRK from the outset, negated our sovereignty concerning the launch. After all, they instigated the UN Security Council to adopt a resolution on sanctions and started their ferocious hostilities against the DPRK. Such hostilities continue this year too. Under the circumstances, we successfully conducted the third underground nuclear test on the highest level on February 12th as part of our practical countermeasures to defend the security and sovereignty of the country. Afterwards, too, far from drawing a due lesson, however, the United States and its followers, including the South Korean puppets, are making desperate efforts to apply another stronger sanctions to us more viciously and more tenaciously. Not resting content with it, they started another key resolve and full eagle joint military exercises to suffocate the DPRK for 2 months. That is, 60 days from March 1st, with the mobilization of huge aggressive armed forces. Unlike last year, the current joint military exercises are scheduled to be involving a load of ground, sea, air, nuclear striking means of the U.S. imperialist aggressor forces, including nuclear-powered supercarrier striking flotilla and strategic bomber B-52, loaded with more than 100 nuclear bombs, and the South Korean puppets and even the armed forces of different other satellite states, including Britain, Australia, and Canada. In this respect, the joint military exercises cannot be construed otherwise than the most dangerous nuclear war racket aimed at us, and the most undisguised military provocations made by the groups of all hostile forces. The serious situation shows that the infringement of the United States, the South Korean puppets, and the hostile forces upon the sovereignty of the DPRK is surpassing the degree of ferocious economic sanctions and goes over to an open aggressive military offensive. Concerning the prevailing situation, the Supreme Command of the Korean People's Army, with a noble mission to be responsible for defense and security of the country and defend the destiny of the nation, through the Panmunjom mission, sent a meaningful notice of warning to the commander of the U.S. imperialist aggressor forces in South Korea on February the 23rd that if the U.S. side lights a fuse to war, from the moment it will spend the most painful time of countdown, precipitating their death. But the joint military exercises continue, and the plot of the United States and the South Korean puppets to apply stronger sanctions to us gets more despicable with each passing day. Historically, the Korean people have never shot an arrow nor thrown a stone at the United States. But the United States made us have a bitter grudge which cannot be walked off down through generations, and not content with it, is running amok with bloodshot eyes to conquer us today too. The problem is that the South Korean puppets, steeped in worship and sycophancy to the United States, are chiming in with such moves. Recently, the South Korean Minister of National Defense, Kim Kwan-jin, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Chung Sung-jo, touring Army Corps units on the forefront, the Fleet Command and guided missile units, agitate that military provocations are expected from us and cry for a gruesome strike on the source of provocation and preemptive attack. As for them, they are the traitors who ruptured the inter-Korean relations together with trader Lee Myung-bak, ignorant of politics and military affairs. They are military gangsters who are rushing about without knowing what their U.S. master thinks of, what is the intention of the neighboring countries, and what the whole fellow countrymen and the nation want. The South Korean authorities, together with them, are moving like robots and saying like parrot, as their master wants, without knowing the precious wealth of the nation, crying for giving up nuclear program and stopping provocations. The Korean army and the people can never remain an onlooker on the fact that the sovereignty and dignity of the nation are infringed upon, and the supreme interests of the country are threatened by the traitors in league with their U.S. master. In reality, the infringement of the United States, the South Korean puppets, and all other hostile forces upon the sovereignty of the DPRK is developing into dangerous military provocation to light a fuse to war. Concerning the serious prevailing situation, I have been authorized to announce at home and abroad the following important measures to be taken by the Supreme Command of the Korean People's Army. First, the Supreme Command of the Korean People's Army, as we have already declared, will take more powerful practical second and third countermeasures successively to cope with the outrageous hostilities of the United States and the hostile forces. Our army and people do not say empty words. It is the metal of Korea dignified with the Sungun to do what it says. The army and people of Korea have lived so. In the course, we won in the true wars and covered the road of victory, braving all kinds of difficulties. The hostile forces, including the United States and the South Korean puppets, should not neglect our warning. The frontline army groups, units of the ground, naval, air and anti-aircraft and strategic rocket forces, and the worker peasant red forces and the red young guards have already entered the state of total confrontation war, according to the operational plan finally endorsed by the respected Supreme Commander. We do not conceal it. Moreover, since the U.S. imperialists wield nuclear weapons and the South Korean puppets talk about preemptive strike, will also strike back with different kinds of precision nuclear striking means of our own style. Once the button is pressed, fire will be opened, and once the fire is opened, everything will be in flames. Korea is not the Balkan. It is neither Iraq nor Libya all the more. Our army and people are ready for everything, unlike in the past. Second, the Korean Armistice Agreement will be totally nullified. The current war exercises of the United States and the South Korean puppets are an intensive manifestation of systematic destruction of the Korean Armistice Agreement. Accordingly, the Supreme Command of the Korean People's Army will totally nullify the effectiveness of the Korean Armistice Agreement, which had been nominally existed from March 12th, the very moment war exercises enter intensive stage. We'll mount limitless precision strike at any time and at any moment as we please without being restricted by the Armistice Agreement, and hasten the accomplishment of the great cause of national reunification, the desire of the nation. Third, the Supreme Command of the Korean People's Army will totally terminate the activities of the Panmunjom mission of the Korean People's Army. Our army has established and operated temporarily as a negotiating apparatus for the establishment of peace mechanism of the Korean Peninsula. Concerning it, a decision will be made simultaneously to cut the telephone line between the Korean and U.S. military at Panmunjom. We can say that our choice has become clear now, since the movements of all hues of the hostile forces to encroach upon our sovereignty and dignity are becoming dangerous. It is the unshakable stand and powerful way of counteraction of our army and people to strike with a sword when the enemy takes out a knife, blow up the enemy with a gun when the enemy takes up a rifle, and beat back with a more powerful precision nuclear strike of our style when the enemy threatens us with nukes. The United States and its followers must not forget that they are at the crossroads of destiny. The final victory is on the side of our army and people, who have turned out to defend the sovereignty of the nation and supreme interests of the country.
American forces in South Korea held a large military drill on Thursday. This follows North Korea's threat on Tuesday to scrap the 1953 Armistice Agreement that ended the Korean War. The drill took place at a U.S. base in Dongducheon in northern South Korea. About 250 American and South Korean soldiers participated in the maneuvers. They practiced coming down ropes to the ground from 3 transport helicopters hovering at 20 meters. The American forces say this is their first major landing drill in South Korea involving a special airborne unit from the U.S. mainland.
We were able to strengthen our bonds and our relationships by working hand in hand on this training and these exercises, and just building those bonds, those relationships, and just keeping the peace and stability.
The top U.S. military commander in South Korea says the Armistice Agreement has ensured peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula for 60 years, and that America is ready to defend its ally.
It's still just a war of words on the Korean Peninsula, but the exchange of verbal fire has become more intense by the hour. This from South Korea's new president at a military commissioning ceremony on Friday.
I will devote all my efforts to making my country strong and prosperous with robust security. I will deal strongly with North Korean provocations.
Please raise their hand.
The barrages between North and South Korea were sparked when the UN Security Council unanimously passed a resolution of harsher sanctions on Pyongyang, a reaction to a nuclear test last month. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visited the frontline troops involved the last time these two nations exchanged live fire in 2010. 4 South Koreans were killed. Seoul has told the civilians on that island to be prepared for evacuation. Kim said his forces would be ready for all-out war and ditched a non-aggression pact between the two countries. The South Korean government expressed regret on Friday when the North cut a phone hotline between the two nations. Friday saw several emergency closed-door meetings here in Seoul. Now, threats like this from North Korea are nothing new, but they are for President Park Geun-hye, facing an early test after just 2 weeks in office. Some feel there is also a much wider audience for these threats from North Korea.
It's targeted at the UN Security Council, trying to intimidate the international community across the board to crack or to cave in to their rhetoric. And they think that they have greater resolve and that they can win this game of brinksmanship.
The focus now, any provocative moves by North Korea that could draw a response. They have created no-fly and no-sail zones, normally indicating short-range missile tests. And then on Monday, when the U.S. and South Korea resume military exercises, something North Korea has called staging for war, and South Korea's military has said that they could turn into a punishment mode if Kim Jong-un's army in any way hits targets south of the border. Scott Heidler, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
News agencies in the DPRK say the country's internet servers have come under attack, with hackers from the U.S. and South Korea to blame. The accusation comes as South Korean and U.S. military forces take part in exercises amid heightened tension on the Korean peninsula. South Korea has refuted allegations, while the U.S. has declined to comment. The alleged cyber attacks involved the downing of several official state websites, as well as a wave of mysterious disruptions that have made internet access at times.
South Korean soldiers took part in a military drill on Tuesday near the demilitarized zone amid rising tensions over North Korea's threats. In Paju, the border area, South Korean soldiers were conducting a regular military exercise with about 30 tanks, separate from the joint drills currently underway with U.S. troops. South Korea and U.S. forces are conducting large-scale joint military drills until the end of April, while the North is also gearing up for a statewide military exercise. North Korea's official media on Tuesday released still photographs of its leader, Kim Jong-un, visiting military units near the border with the South. The still photos showed Kim Jong-un on a boat sailing toward an island where military units are based and being welcomed by soldiers. He was shown looking around the units and speaking to them. On March 7th, Kim also inspected 2 other military units near the border with the South. On Monday, North Korea cut off a Red Cross hotline with the South as its war of words escalated. The recent actions have been in response to the joint military drill in the South and UN sanctions imposed for its recent nuclear test. North Korea has accused the United States of using the military drills in South Korea as a launch pad for a nuclear war. It has threatened to scrap the armistice with Washington that ended hostilities in the 1950-53 Korean War. Tensions on the Korean peninsula have risen since the North conducted a 3rd nuclear test on February 12th, prompting new UN sanctions.
That tense situation in North Korea, every single day a new development.
It's grown more tense today, George. Again, a show of force now from the U.S. military in response, one day after North Korea warned that war is possible at any moment. The U.S. has taken action, proving that it is taking these new threats from Kim Jong-un's government seriously. White House correspondent Jim Avila has been watching all of it all night long. Good morning to you, Jim.
Good morning, Josh. Certainly the United States sending a stern message using its military overnight. The United States sent 2 B-2 stealth bombers in a non-stop flight, 6,500 miles round trip over the Pacific to drop dummy ammunitions over a South Korean military range. The United States saying it's, quote, providing extended deterrence to our allies in the Asia-Pacific region, letting them know that they can do that, exactly that, send a bomber all that way across the the ocean all the way over to North Korea. Now this, of course, is in response to North Korean increased tensions, where they've been saying recently, as late as yesterday, that they're going to wage war against South Korea and the United States. Now perhaps ratcheting that tension down just a bit is a picture that's been viral all over the computers in this country, and that's this picture showing North Korean military leaders looking at a computer that looks pretty antiquated. And people have been laughing about that, but the United States is not laughing. And in fact, the White House said yesterday, North Korea's bellicose rhetoric and the threats that they engage in follow a pattern designed to raise tension and intimidate others. So things pretty hot between North Korea and the United States right now. Josh?
We'll certainly be keeping an eye on it. Thank you, Jim.
North Korea has put its rockets on standby to attack U.S. military bases in South Korea and the Pacific. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un issued the order at an overnight emergency meeting with top army commanders. State media quoted Mr. Kim saying the time has come to settle accounts with the US imperialists. Thousands of soldiers and students have marched at the main square in Pyongyang to support their leader's call to arms. They've chanted death to the US imperialists and sweep away the US aggressors. South Korean media are already reporting increased movement of vehicles and troops at the North's mid- and long-range missile units. Our Korea Bureau Chief Lim Yoon-suk tells us more about North Korea's missile capabilities.
Right now, experts believe that North Korea does not have the capability, the missile capabilities, that can reach the United States or even Hawaii. But its medium and long-range missiles are capable of targeting Japan and here in South Korea. But, experts are saying that targeting the U.S. bases in Japan and South Korea is really like targeting the U.S. itself. And so if North Korea attacked any of the U.S. bases, then it should be ready to face the United States and not just Japan and South Korea.
And just yesterday, the US defied threats from Pyongyang and flew 2 nuclear-capable bombers over the Korean peninsula. It's the first time the B-2 stealth bombers were used in joint drills with Seoul. The US says the aircraft flew 10,000 kilometers from a base in Missouri, demonstrating its ability to conduct long-range strikes quickly and at will. But the North says Washington's provocation has gone beyond the phase of threat and blackmail. U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel denies that Washington was acting provocatively. Instead, he blamed North Korea for raising tensions with its nuclear test in February and its subsequent threats in the face of global condemnation.
No, I don't think we're doing anything extraordinary or provocative or out of the orbit of what nations do to protect their own interests.
Professor John McKay from Analysis International tells us what North Korea may be trying to achieve.
I think the first thing he's trying to achieve is to shore up his own power base, particularly with the North Korean military. There are some fairly hardline people in the North Korean military, and the last thing that Kim Jong-un wants to do is to appear weak or hesitant. And so he's really, to some extent, pandering to the military to try to gain their support. He has been in power for 16 months, but that's a relatively short period. He's relatively young and inexperienced, and I think he has to try and make sure that the generals are on side. And looking after the military and making these kinds of noises is guaranteed to build some support with the military. I think the question always with North Korea is that they are trying to put themselves into a good position should there be some bargaining. There always has been in the past. We go through these periods of crisis and then we have some kind of meeting. And the North Koreans, I think, are trying to push up their stakes to try to make sure they're in as strong a position as possible when talks do take place, as they probably will. Who knows when.
We've learned that the North Korean state TV has announced that the North Korea's leader has signed off on a plan to put his rockets on standby for firing at U.S. targets, both in the Pacific and right here in the U.S. mainland. Well, forget about the mainland. North Korea can't reach here, but there are tens of thousands of American troops in places like Japan, Korea, and Guam that are well within reach of North Korean rockets and artillery. This is just the latest escalating move in sort of a tit-for-tat measure between the North Koreans, South Korea, and the U.S., and it seems like no one is willing to back down. Pentagon officials were in no mood to back down hours after flying a stealth bomber over the Korean peninsula.
We will unequivocally defend, and we are unequivocally committed to that alliance with South Korea.
The bombers can carry up to 20 tons of conventional and nuclear ordnance. On Thursday, 2 B-2s took off from an Air Force base in Missouri. They flew 6,600 miles to a training exercise and dropped inactive payload on a South Korean island.
Why do you think it's wise for the U.S. to respond and poke back at some of these North Korean provocations?
Well, I don't think we're poking back or responding. The North Koreans have to understand that what they're doing is very dangerous.
But even the defense secretary admitted the U.S. is not sure how its actions are being interpreted in North Korea.
There is uncertainty in that government and in their leadership and intentions.
Pyongyang recently released intimidating new photos of its army and artillery. These are real enough, but North Korea is known to exaggerate its abilities. This shot of a beach landing exercise appears to be photoshopped. Some of the hovercraft look exactly alike. But there is genuine concern over a new missile North Korea unveiled at a parade last year.
That road mobile missile would have the capacity to reach the United States. That's a different type of missile from the one that was tested back in December. And because it's road mobile, I think that it has raised concerns.
Raised concerns, but yet North Korea has never tested that missile, so there's no proof and really no clear idea of exactly where they are in the development process. No one thinks that that missile is ready to go, but it is something to keep its eye on over the next several years.
Thousands of North Koreans have turned out for a mass rally in Pyongyang in support of their leader's call to arms. Soldiers and students chanted death to the US imperialists and sweep away the US aggressors. North Korea is said to have put missile units on standby to attack American bases in South Korea and the Pacific. The order from leader Kim Jong-un came after the US flew 2 stealth bombers over the Korean peninsula. America said the practice runs were designed to show its ability to conduct long-range precision strikes quickly and at will. Seoul, which has been carrying out routine military drills with America, says it's closely monitoring movements in North Korea. Pyongyang is angry about a hike in sanctions imposed after it carried out a 3rd nuclear test.
Every provocative, bellicose word and action that this new young leader has taken so far since he's come to power.
One sign this could all be North Korean bluster? The North has kept open a key industrial park where hundreds of South Koreans do business every day and where global trade produces roughly $2 billion for the isolated nuclear power. White House officials tell us they've dramatically stepped up communication with the South Korean government as well as the new governments in Japan and China. Scott, the administration is looking for allies throughout the region to impress upon North Korea it is playing a very perilous game.
A rally in Pyongyang, tens of thousands of soldiers making their voices heard. Banners above the crowds reading, "Death to those who dare invade us." The show of strength followed an emergency meeting between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and his top military advisors, after which North Korea rocket units were put on standby. Mr. Kim declaring the time has come to settle accounts with the U.S. Concern has already spread beyond the Korean peninsula. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Moscow.
The situation may slip out of control and fall into a vicious circle.
North Korea's latest saber-rattling comes a day after the U.S. flew nuclear-capable B-2 bombers off the coast of the Korean peninsula, part of military drills with South Korea. Pyongyang calls the drills preparation for an invasion. While bold statements from North Korea are nothing new, Bruce Klingner of Washington's Heritage Foundation worries the latest threats from Kim Jong-un are different.
He is likely emboldened by the recent successful long-range missile test, the even larger nuclear test last month, and also emboldened by the knowledge that history shows the U.S. and South Korea have never retaliated despite repeated deadly attacks. So he is more likely to miscalculate and stumble across a red line.
A South Korean military source tells VOA's Korean service that Seoul has detected increased activity at the North's long-range artillery units and strategic rocket units. Still, there are some who think tensions will subside. U.S. Senator Bob Corker met with senior South Korean officials Friday in Seoul.
Hopefully what will occur is
cooler heads will prevail and this will de-escalate, and hopefully we can have fruitful negotiations about the future. And
for now, though, all eyes are on North Korea. Many worried the country's young leader may try to make one of his threats a reality. Jeff Selden, VOA News.
There was a swift reaction in Washington to North Korea's nuclear threats.
I can tell you that the United States is fully capable of defending against any North Korean ballistic missile attack.
On Capitol Hill, it was called absurd.
I don't think that the regime in Pyongyang wants to commit suicide, but that, as they must surely know, that would be the result of any attack on the United States.
Even as the Obama administration weighed the provocation, it was not totally unexpected.
One has to take what any government says seriously, but I would also say that this kind of extreme rhetoric has not been unusual for this regime, unfortunately.
North Korea also threatened to scrap the ceasefire that ended the Korean War in the face of tough new United Nations sanctions.
Taken together, these sanctions will bite, and bite hard. They increase North Korea's isolation and raise the cost to North Korea's leaders of defying the international community.
It was a unanimous vote by the UN Security Council and had the crucial backing of North Korea's main supporter, China.
The top priority now is to diffuse the tension, bring down the heat, focus on diplomatic track.
The new sanctions against Pyongyang are aimed at halting its nuclear and missile programs.
Sanctions definitely work. They put pressure on the regime. That's why they're screaming so loud. These will bite, but they're never enough.
Calling recent U.S. policy towards North Korea a failure, Cirincione says sanctions must be combined with dialogue if they are to have any chance of success. Tracy Brown, Associated Press.
While tensions continue to build on the Korean peninsula, the U.S. has positioned a destroyer capable of shooting down missiles near North Korea. An unnamed U.S. official has said that the USS Fitzgerald has been sent off the southwestern coast of the Korean peninsula. Meanwhile, the White House spokesman Jay Carney says Washington has not seen any sign that Pyongyang is mobilizing its forces following last week's military threats. North Korea said last week the country is in a state of war with South Korea and is ready to strike targets in the U.S. mainland. The threats heightened tensions on the Korean peninsula. Washington then flexed its muscles by sending 2 of its nuclear-capable stealth bombers to the region. Joining us now from Washington is Mike Billington. He's with the Asia desk of the Executive Intelligence Review. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV. Now, it is interesting to note that White House spokesman Jay Carney has said that there has been no sign that Pyongyang is mobilizing its forces following last week's threats. Despite that, the U.S. is now deploying a USS Fitzgerald off the Korean peninsula. What do you make of that?
Well, I make that this is we're in a global situation which is very, very close to war between the United States and Russia and the United States and China, due to the insistence on the U.S. that it have the right to regime change anywhere it wishes, as in the Middle East, as in Libya and Iraq, and now Syria and Iran on the target list, and that the attempt to respond to what are relatively normal North Korean extreme rhetoric after being given sanctions or after seeing these deployments, military exercises in the South, is a tit-for-tat response in which it could, even though there's no particular intention on either side in the local context to provoke a war, the global context means that a spark that could go off there could very rapidly become not only a war in the Korean Peninsula, but a war on a global scale, a global thermonuclear war, which has to be seen in the context of the greatest global financial collapse now spreading across Europe and the United States, which is what's driving this push for war.
Right, but Mr. Billington, do you think the U.S. has calculated in these threats, the threat of a global spark or whatever you may call it, which could dangerously escalate the situation into a full-scale war, which, as you've just pointed out, no side really wants?
Exactly. No side could win either. The Obama administration is functioning as an asset of the City of London and Wall Street, who are desperate. They're panicked. The Cyprus situation, the insane decision to begin seizing people's private accounts in the banking system, shows the level of panic in the Western financial oligarchy, the financial institutions. They're pushing for wars on a scale which has to be understood as a threat to the Russia-China allies, axis, to effectively say that we, the West, under the British and Obama's administration, have the right to take over any country we wish, which includes Korea. So the over-response, the B-2 bombers, the F-22 bombers, and so forth, are seen by China as not a response to Korea alone, but a response to China. Just as the ABM systems being placed across the border of Russia in Europe are seen by the Russians as a direct threat to take out their response capacity, i.e. to create the potential for a first strike from the West. This is how serious this global crisis is. If the North were to carry out another provocation, as they have in the past, by shelling an island or something on that scale, South Korea is totally capable and ready to respond with a fierce military response against the source of those weapons or something on that scale. And that's been made very public by the South Korean government. The excess of response coming from the Obama administration is counter even to our own military's desires to try to calm down these situations. We do have General Dempsey, the head of our Joint Chiefs, going to Russia to try to calm down the escalating tensions and the threat of
Mr.
global
Billington,
war.
we're running out of time very quickly. You've just made a connection between the recent tensions on the Korean Peninsula and the global economic meltdown, which is taking place specifically within the Western countries. Now, how lucrative do you think, though, that a new war on Korea or any other country is going to be for these bankers, considering these economies have tanked trillions of dollars in their occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan without much result?
It's not lucrative in the sense of taking the loot. It's not that they're simply going for the oil in the Middle East or control over Korea. It's going for preventing the emergence of the Russia-China-India alliance, which is the only combination of nations in the world which could offer an alternative to the totally bankrupt Western financial system, which is now committing acts of outright genocide in Cyprus and Greece and Portugal and Italy, and very soon to come in the rest of Europe and in the United States. To prevent any alliance of those forces against them, they are willing to provoke regional wars, which, if the Russia-China-India axis does not back down, they're willing to go to thermonuclear confrontation with those powers. We're closer to war now than we were in the Cuba Missile Crisis.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Mike Billington with the Asia desk of the Executive Intelligence Review. They're joining us via Skype from Washington. Mr. Billington, thank you very much for your comments here on Press TV.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, America's new path to war. So the United States is lowering the threshold for American military involvement in a possible war with North Korea. In the face of mounting threats from the young, untested dictator of the country, Kim Jong-un, the U.S. is getting ready to fight back. Now, while the nearly 30,000 American troops in South Korea are already obligated to defend that country in the event of an all-out war, under the new plan, these troops could fight in direct response just to provocations from North Korea. It could be a significant difference from the way things are right now. Pentagon correspondent Chris Lawrence is out front tonight. And Chris, let me start off by asking you that question. What does this new agreement actually mean for American troops and the threshold where they would be in conflict?
Aaron, it basically puts it down on paper and formalizes the agreement that the U.S. is going to be a part of this defense right from the get-go. Not just all-out war, but even these small-scale attacks. So what are we talking about? Well, North Korea was accused of sinking, torpedoing a South Korean ship. So one of the provocations could be North Korean ships going into these disputed waters, which they have in the past. Also, air. North Korean jets flying into South Korean airspace. They came close to violating the DMZ just last year. South Korea had to scramble 4 fighter jets in response. And finally, shelling these border islands like they did a couple years ago, that also would very likely invite a response. Some of the other reasons are to step up the cooperation between U.S. and South Korean troops, as well as act as a deterrent. For example, just recently, Kim Jong-un threatened to wipe out entire South Korean military units on some of those other border islands. Aaron?
Now, Chris, a lot of people watching will say, okay, so does this open America up to more serious conflict, to war?
It actually opens the U.S. up to smaller conflicts, but those smaller conflicts are more likely to happen, and they happen more frequently. So it's opening the range of things that the U.S. might be involved in right from the get-go. And even though South Korea may still respond first to a North Korean provocation, if North Korea then retaliates, you start to get this escalation that the U.S. could be very much involved in.
That's right. Small things can become big things pretty quickly. Chris Lawrence, thank you. And I want to bring in Colonel Cedric Leighton now and Gordon Chang, author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. Gordon, let me start with you. So this agreement, you just heard Chris Lawrence reporting what it would mean. So the things that North Korea seems to do pretty regularly could now mean American troops are fighting over. You say this is dangerous.
Well, it's dangerous in one sense. You know, we can always get involved, even in the small provocations. I'm concerned, though, that we have just spent 2.5 years negotiating with the South Koreans. We don't look resolute. We look legalistic. And that's a problem, because I can see General Thurman saying to President Park, well, we're not going to get involved in this incident because it doesn't fall under paragraph 1 of Roman numeral 3. I think it would have been much better for President Obama to stare into a camera and say, the United States will respond to attacks on South Korea with the immediate use of force. We talked like that during the Cold War, and we kept the peace. We don't talk like that anymore. And because of that, deterrence is breaking down in Asia, and that's why we've had all of these problems with North Korea recently.
So you think deterrence is failing?
It is certainly failing, because the Chinese and the North Koreans think that they can push us out of Asia, and the Chinese have been engaging in some very provocative tactics recently, because they think that they can push us around.
So, Colonel Leighton, North Korea is an army of 1.2 million people, 120,000 special operations forces, which is kind of a stunning number. We don't know exactly how many nukes, and of course, up to 800 medium and short-range ballistic missiles. Now, just to give everyone a sense of the military power there, and of course, over the past 6 months, there have been a lot of tests and provocations. So is this deal a sign that the United States sees war as a serious possibility?
I think so, Aaron. I think it's one of those moments where the United States is looking at burden sharing with its allies. So it's, although it may be legalistic, as Gordon mentioned, these are the kinds of agreements that the Obama administration really wants to bring to the forefront with its allies. So in the case of the Korean situation, war is an extremely likely possibility because what you have here is this hair trigger response that is being created not only by the fact that we have troops there, but also by the fact that we have this agreement in place now.
And what, Colonel, does that war look like? Because a lot of Americans are saying, all right, I'm worried about North Korea. North Korea is an issue, but I've been hearing a lot about it over the years, and I don't know that I am quite aware or quite prepared for what you just said, that war is a real possibility.
Well, the war may not be a full-blown war in the sense of a nuclear confrontation or even a major theater war with massive armies fighting each other across the Korean Peninsula, as was the case in the 1950s. But what will happen probably is you'll have responses to some very specific actions. So if an island is shelled, a South Korean island is shelled, there'll be a response that will be commensurate with that action. There'll also be an action probably to get rid of the North Korean command and control elements that are controlling controlling military actions against the South, and
Right.
the South Koreans will probably lean on us to do that for them.
Gordon, what I don't understand, though, is, I mean, who knows? This is the gamesmanship of war, right?
Right.
There's a provocation. The United States responds. North Korea wants to prove it's tough. Why, in that situation, wouldn't they use a short-range nuclear missile on South Korea?
Well, because they know that we would know because we could trace it, and so therefore we
But
can
they believe
retaliate.
that the United States would respond.
They may, they may think that they can get away with it because if they think the United States won't respond. This was the whole issue during the Cold War in Western Europe, whether the U.S. would use nukes to protect countries that were not the United States. And so, and obviously China thinks that it can push us around because we reneged on our treaty obligations to the Philippines last year, and we allowed the Chinese to take Scarborough Shoal. Then the Chinese ramp up the pressure on the Japanese, and then you can see the North Koreans ramp up the pressure on South Korea. That's how this can get out of control.
And of course, China has been supporting North Korea and providing them a lot of help. There was a third anti-American propaganda video that came out of the North Korean government today. Threatens an attack on American forces using, quote, powerful weapons of mass destruction. Depicts an invasion of Seoul in which 150,000 Americans are killed. Now, there aren't that many Americans in Seoul, but obviously this video is designed to motivate the North Korean people, and this comes on top of the other recent videos, right? The one where the White House was in the crosshairs, the Capitol blew up, and New York City went up in flames. Okay, these videos are the stuff of imagination, but are they serious?
Well, they're serious and they're trying to intimidate us. And that really is something that's important because the South Koreans don't think that we're going to defend them. There was that survey which said that the United States wasn't going to use nukes to help South Korea, and the South Koreans wanted their own nuclear arsenal. And that's a stunning vote of no confidence in the U.S. And if the South Koreans don't trust us, probably the Chinese and the North Koreans also think that they can push us around, and that's when it gets really dangerous because then someone tries to start something really very, very provocative.
Of course, makes you think about what all this means for Iran, too. Well, thanks so much to both of you. And still to come.
The entire Korean people of all ages and both sexes have taken up arms. The mountains and plains of Korea have turned into trenches. All under arms and hearts burning, we defend prospering fatherland. Honorable rifles from anti-Japanese fighters today are shining on millions of shoulders. Why does this land turn into battlefields? It is because of the nuclear war maneuvers of the U.S. imperialists and their satellites, who adopted illegal brigandage resolutions on sanctions against the DPRK in succession, and started the key resolve and full Eagle joint military exercises with the mobilization of huge aggressive armed forces. The Korean people have taken up arms as they regard sovereignty as their lives and love peace. A veteran in his 80s who participated in the Korean War provoked by the U.S. imperialists in the 1950s says, "I've still some bullets in my heart which were not used in the burning trench in the 1950s. Give me a rifle. I will shout them on the enemy." Our rifles are rifles of justice, loaded with bullets of hatred and revenge, pent up over half a century. The workers, farmers, intellectuals, and youth and students of Korea have taken up a hammer, sickle, or pen in one hand and a rifle in the other hand. My country is all an iron fortress. We are brave, a match for 100 fighters. The rifles that hit the enemy in honorary days today are shining on millions of shoulders. The zeal for labor and study at the workshop and university has given way to militancy. Workshops and residences, jobs and duties, and sexes and ages are different, but their hearts are burning with a will to clear the earth of the aggressor U.S. imperialists and South Korean traitors forever.